It's crazy to me that in the year 2024, the Pauper format is going through its own Splinter Twin situation, with the brute scale combo taking over the metagame and Modern Horizons 3 rearing its ugly head in another format that you all love. It's wild to me that with someone's Magic's most powerful cards existing in a format like this, that it can't keep up with Modern Horizons 3. It's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. As a Modern player and as a Pauper player, I want to provide that unique perspective of providing comparison to a combo that's long been loved by a lot of Modern players, but a lot of people would agree that it may not have a net positive effect on the format if it was legal today, and provide perspective on what it meant for Splinter Twin to exist in Modern back then and how it draws similarities to brute scale now, to maybe providing a reason to banning it come the August 26th banned and restricted announcement. Should Gavin Verhey and the Pauper format panel make a change, and is there an argument based on how brute scale combo has warped the metagame around it for decks to be faster than it, or to be able to remove and keep up and overwhelm to make sure that the brute scale combo can sit where it is? Combo has existed in Pauper for a very long time. You have the Walls combo decks, you have the Cycle Storm decks, One Land Spy, Ruby Storm, if you want to call it that. There's so many ways to win the game, and older combo decks have been banned as well, but the philosophy generally has been that combo can exist, it just shouldn't be at the top. Now that's kind of changed with brute scale combo, which is why it's kind of had my attention for a very long time. So let's hop into a bit of a metagame discussion, then we can break down the combo, and then maybe talk about how all of this really ties into what Splinter Twin meant for Modern. To get too far into this video, I wanted to let you know the artist behind Dockside Extortionist, co-host of the Distraction Makers, and overall great person Forrest Amell is launching his Kickstarter for his 5-color playmat series. This Kickstarter brings to life 5 exclusive playmats designed by Forrest for Magic the Gathering, featuring the 5 colors that you know and love. Now, with great exclusive art that's not going to appear outside of the Kickstarter, and with premium stitching and no logos to gum up the art, these are going to be great playmats to show off your battlefield and your spells. Check it out in the link down below. You don't want to miss a great opportunity to support a fantastic member, a creator, and an artist of the community. But for now, back to the video. Now, the Pauper metagame is kind of ruled by the same couple of decks, especially with brute scale really establishing itself at the top of the metagame, with Ghoul Ramp, Grixis Affinity, Synthesizer, Delver, Mono White Aggro, Madness Burn, which is just kind of a more synergistic fun version of Burn, Synthesizer being Burn, but like more kind of go wide with its creatures, Elves, Golgari Gardens, and Walls combo. Now we have another combo deck in here with brute scale combo. We have Aggro in the Synthesizer, Madness Burn, Mono White Aggro, and the Elves kind of seen as like an aggro combo deck. Golgari Gardens is the closest thing to a control deck at the top here. It's kind of more so mid-range, closer to the Jund aspect of for you Modern players. Mono Blue Delver is that classic Mono Blue tempo, weenie, close to the ground flyers type of deck. And then Gruul Ramp in Affinity is the type of deck where it looks to interact in a certain way, but also overwhelm on top of that, right? Present an overwhelming board and go over top. Gruul Ramp kind of that exponential curve where it just goes from 0 to 100 real quick. Grixis Affinity kind of tries to interact and piecemeal here and there and present you with an overwhelming board as well. So it's either interact and overwhelm or speed up and get faster than brute scale combo. And you see that kind of stay the same with the 14-day metagame. You see Dimir Control kind of rear its ugly head in that sense as well. But then even in the 7-day metagame, you see the same decks ruling at the top in terms of its breakdown. So what does it mean for something like this to even exist in the metagame? How is this similar to Splinter Twin? Now, before I even get into the combo, Splinter Twin was a deck in Modern. For those of you that haven't been playing Modern for that long, for those of you Pauper players to understand, Splinter Twin is a card. You know, for red and 2, enchant creature, put a token that's a copy of this creature onto the battlefield. That token gains haste, exile at the beginning of the next end step. So what you do is you put Splinter Twin onto a creature that can untap a permanent. And there's plenty of creatures that can do that. Plenty of creatures that can do that in blue specifically. And so you play that creature, you put Splinter Twin on it, you tap it to create a token. That token enters and untaps the original Splinter Twin creature, and then you just tap it, create another one, untap it. You create an infinite amount of creatures with haste, right? So noting again, the token has haste. So you create an instant win on that situation. What Splinter Twin did in Modern was that, specifically with the Izzet shell that existed at the time, it was a tempo combo deck, a control combo deck in many ways, that had soft, unseeable tempo that a lot of people could not put into words. They could not make it tangible, because what happened was it essentially said if you did not hold up interaction, you would lose the game. Because what you would do is on turn 3, you would flash in a creature that would be able to untap a permanent, and then the turn after that on turn 4, you could play Splinter Twin and win. But if your opponent, you would only do that if your opponent tapped out. If your opponent didn't tap out, essentially you could just pass because you're a blue deck. You can hold up Cryptic Command. You can hold up other counter magic to stop your opponent. Now, you know, that wasn't a world with a counter spell and force negation, all that stuff. Modern's very different right now. But when it comes to back then, you could just keep going and going and going. You just had this threat. Great, you got a creature out, start swinging. It's got flying, it's got good evasion. It was a good stat at the time. This wasn't even the time of Fatal Push, which is absolutely crazy to me. So this was a different time in Modern. A lot of people argue that removal has upgraded. And now in many ways, I would see that Brute Scale combo isn't a combo that really should exist. It's one that does die to a lot of the traditional removal that exists in Pauper, but it still makes its way at the top of the game because it's a combo deck that presents an I win situation if you do not interact, if you tap out. It's kind of what Splinter Twin did, which is why we might have a Splinter Twin situation. Now, the Brute Scale combo really relies on 2 pieces and a payoff. Splinter Twin was a lot simpler. It just required 2 cards. The combo was kind of in itself. But Brute Scale combo, green and 1 for a creature, Eldrazi Lizard, Basking Brute Scale with Devoid. It has no color. And now 1 and green, adapt 1. Whenever 1 or more 1/1 counters are put onto Basking Brute Scale, you may create a 0/1 Eldrazi creature spawn token that says sacrifice, add a green. So you have a death trigger potential with the token, and then you put some 1/1 counters on it. You create more of those death triggers or creatures that enter. Now with something like Sadistically that you can enchant and equip onto the Basking Brute Scale, you put a 1/1 counter on it whenever a creature enters the battlefield. So you kind of see the situation here. You have the Basking Brute Scale, you put the Sadistically on it. Then what happens is you pay 2, you adapt. You put a 1/1 counter on the Brute Scale. Then that creates a spawn token. You sacrifice the spawn token. Sadistically triggers because a creature died. You put a 1/1 counter on the Brute Scale. It goes back and forth, back and forth. You create infinite, not only ETBs, but also death triggers, but also the Basking Brute Scale grows infinitely. The problem is that that is a combat situation where Basking Brute Scale has no evasion and it doesn't even add haste. So it's not like you're winning on that turn exactly right there, right? Otherwise, you would have the potential to win on turn 3 if this creature had haste. Now, Basking Brute Scale does not have that. So in this case, you would need to win with something like Nadir's Nightblade if you wanted to win on that spot kind of right there, or otherwise you could kind of win and attack in if your opponent had no blockers. Now, whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life and gain 1 life, notably printed as common in Commander Masters, but reprinted in Modern Horizons 3 as an uncommon alongside Basking Brute Scale. Kind of fitting that those two can combo together. Now that is the combo at large. That is how that works. And there are largely ways to find the combo, make it more consistent, which is what the deck really wants to do. Now, if you look at the rest of the Modern metagame, as I mentioned, there's plenty of combo decks here. We have the Walls combo. Elves can be seen as like kind of an aggro combo deck in many ways. Cycle Storm is as one. We have the Gruul Ruby Storm, Ruby-less Storm deck that exists as well, and One Land Spy. Those are the ones that really pop into my mind in terms of combo decks. They all exist. The problem is with stuff like Walls combo, when you're underneath this category, is that it's very soft to removal. If you remove key walls like Axebane Guardian, or heck, even the payoff itself in response to the untap trigger or whatever, you probably don't want to do it in response to the untap trigger. They probably have infinite mana by then because you Axebane Guardian and you cripple Freed from the Real from it. So Axebane Guardian taps for net positive mana. You use that colored mana to untap the Axebane Guardian, create infinite mana. You put that in a Secret Door and Valakut Invoker. So this is a very creature heavy combo. If you remove the creatures, they're cooked. There's not much room for interaction or protection at all, especially in the main board. In the sideboard, you gain things like Standard Bearer, which we're going to point out in a section is a very key card in this metagame right now, and something like the protection from black creature here, which also actually is notably very important. Now, when it comes to something like a graveyard synergistic combo deck like Cycle Storm or One Land Spy, this is something that relatively, does die to something like Relic of Progenitus. If you exile their graveyard at a key time, then it will kind of fall flat to that, especially something like Weather the Storm being a more commonly played card right now against these decks. There's so many ways to interact with decks like this and just really make the situation easy. So these combo decks are very powerful. They have a lot of counterplay in terms of the mana and access to cards that they have, but are relatively easy to stop, which is what keeps them at bay. And that's what's important with these combo decks. But specifically with Basking Brute Scale, it dies to a lot. I mean, heck, it dies to stuff out. As far as I'm aware, target non-black creature. This card has no color, so it dies to that. And then it literally dies to Doomblade. Right, it literally dies to cast down and stuff like that. As far as I'm aware, it should. The combo decks that I play, or like the decks that I play, Don't really care about this. I'm a Grixis Affinity player, so I'm throwing Gal Blast at this, and as a combo player, I'm like largely ignoring this. So it should die to this as far as I'm aware in the ruling, but it plays stuff like Tamiyo's Safekeeping as a way to gain indestructible and hexproof, so some protection spells, and it can also play proactively Duress or other similar effects to get cards out of your opponent's hand. So yes, it is soft to many forms of removal that exist in Pauper. If I'm wrong about the Doomblade and stuff out stuff, whatever, fine, persecute me, but it is soft to a lot of removal in the format, especially damage-based removal. So it can be proactive with something like Duress, and it can be reactive with something like Tamiyo's Safekeeping. So you'll see kind of decks like ebb and flow in terms of what type of interaction they're playing. Are they playing Duress's main? Are they playing on the side? Are they playing like 1 to 2 Tamiyos in the main board? Whatever it might be, they make room for what works for their metagame call. And so interaction exists for the deck, kind of very similar to like Infect in that case, kind of being able to protect its combo. And especially with something like Sadistically, an enchantment in an artifact heavy meta. Unless you're green, generally speaking, you don't really have the best enchantment removal. I mean, white also does, but white tends to be more like I just destroy artifacts or just enchantments. Green tends to be the color that does either or. So in this case, with a format dominated by artifacts and affinity, you're going to see more artifact removal. So just namely being that kind of enchantment is also hard in that case. Again, Cast and Fire just really exemplifying a card that's really popular in sideboards and red decks. Exiling an artifact doesn't really interact with enchantments in that case. But something like Standard Bearer is really powerful because you are able to enchant, or you have to enchant the Brute Scale. So it Sadistically can then go on the Standard Bearer that's now actively on the battlefield. And then also you could play, before we kind of move on to that point, you could also play that kind of 1 protection from black creature, where if we kind of pop back here, go all the way back just to kind of point it out here. This card right here says target creature gains protection from black until the end of turn for 1 white. And so what you can do is, in response to the Sadistically, you could give the Basking Brute Scale protection from black, and it kind of falls off. So it's actually a really powerful card, notably right now. But specifically, the Brute Scale combo has a lot of ways that it's just not it's very easily interacted with, but it's still able to be on top because of the interaction that it's able to play as counterplay. It's got Weather the Storm to stop the it's got Weather the Storm to stop the bigger burn decks. It's got the Drown in Sorrow to, once it's created a giant Brute Scale, it can just wipe out a whole board so it can attack through, snuff out for the bigger stuff. Some Mesmeric Fiends for the Thoughtseize, like Duress effects, and then just some more cards in general that really make the combo sing. A lot of consistency. This version is playing 4 Duress in the main, and so a lot of ways for this deck to really interact with the format and force you to hold up removal, especially when they Duress you, especially when they're using stuff like Malevolent Rumble to stay consistent and find the pieces they need. I mean, again, looking at the metagame here, the metagame has a lot of options. You have the Lightning Bolts and the Galvanic Blast out of red. You have the same thing out of Gruul Ram, maybe more creature-based interaction. Mono Red Synthesizer has a lot of random burn pieces to be able to deal with stuff like that. And Mono Blue Delver has like Spell Pierces for the Sadistically and counter spells and all that stuff. It has so many ways to interact, including Snap as well, actually. So many ways for these decks to interact, but Brute Scale combo is still at the top because it presents this I win situation similar to what Splinter Twin was. Splinter Twin was very easily interacted with. You have cryptic commands, you have spell pierces, you have like removal for the creatures. Path to Exile was very popular as well in that situation. So there's a lot of this hard removal for situations like this, and the deck was still able to be at the top of the metagame regardless of that. It essentially took over the design space of what it meant to be that color. If you were in Is It Colors, you pretty much just played Splinter Twin because that was the best way to win at the time. That was the best win condition you had access to. And so now you don't see, like, you have a lot of decks that are playing different types of win conditions. They're splashing into different colors. It actually is beneficial to be playing like 3 colors, not just 2. But at the time, Splinter Twin was the win condition. You had your creatures that you would enchant largely in the blue decks. You could also play like Kiki Jiki, but you wouldn't like Splinter Twin a Kiki Jiki. That doesn't make any sense. The legendaries would kill itself, but you'd had some pieces of redundancy that exist in these decks. Nowadays, you have like Teferi Time Reveler, you have Force of Negation. The deck would arguably be actually like pretty oppressive when it comes to that. But Splinter Twin combo, and very similarly, very easily interacted with in terms of, even though we didn't have Fatal Push, even though we didn't have Force of Negations and Teferi's Time Reveler to stop decks like that, it still was at the top of the metagame, in a metagame that had a lot of interaction, had a lot of option, had a lot of Thoughtseize effects and stuff like that. But Brute Scale combo, similar to that, is still at the top with a lot of interaction. It's kind of where it is. And so that's kind of where I wanted to present this. This video was largely kind of inspired by this article from Alex Ullman. So I really wanted to kind of point that out. Is Basking Brood Scale Pauper MTG Splinter Twin? And I wanted to kind of further elaborate on this article that's going to be linked down below from a modern player's perspective. I think there was a lot of conversation around here around the combo decks, general Pauper philosophy, and all Alex Ullman just being very knowledgeable as being part of the Pauper format panel. But again, I just wanted to kind of provide a soft perspective as a modern player that has seen combo decks ebb and flow, and what it means to be a combo player, play against a combo deck, and how important the ease of interaction is against these combo decks. Like, we see the Ruby Storm deck exist in modern, being relatively easy to interact with based on the interaction that exists in the modern format right now. Flusterstorm, there's that new red one with the blue one with Replicate. Like, there's so many ways to interact with in a combo like that, especially with removal. And then you even have Living End, which just kind of loses to certain types of counter spells and also just hard graveyard hate. So it's important for combo decks like this to exist. It's important as part of the diversity and the answers that you should be able to play against. But also it's important that decks like this have an easy stop to them, because they're decks that just have a I win button, right? It feels like some of the decisions you made don't really mean anything if you just don't play the right interaction at the right time. So when something like Basking Brood Scale really comes up to head and it kind of feels like an MTG Splinter Twin, it can be kind of crazy when Pauper is being affected with something like this. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Is this really Pauper's Splinter Twin? And do you feel with kind of everything discussed here that something needs to be banned? With Splinter Twin being banned previously for similar reasons, kind of holding a format hostage and just being that kind of color's de facto win piece, it may not be exactly the case in terms of Pauper for the de facto piece, but it definitely is at the top of the roost right now. And combo, as I mentioned, has been a part of the Pauper metagame, but the general philosophy has been that it should be easy to interact with. But if it was easy to interact with, why is it pretty much the best deck in the format?